Hello ladies and gentle ladies, and welcome back to another Minecraft modding tutorial for Fabric 1.21. And in this tutorial we are going to be creating a block. So let's just go ahead and get straight into it. We're going to come into our init package here, and we're going to create a new class, and we're going to create a block in it. So remember, this could also be called mod blocks, this could also be called tutorial mod blocks, anything like that is also perfectly fine. And effectively this is going to be exactly the same as our item init, but for blocks. So what we're going to do is we're going to go public static final block, and this needs to be from net.minecraft.block.block, by the way. And this will just be the name of your block. So we can call this example underscore block. Remember, obviously this needs to be all caps because it is a constant, and this will be equal to our actual block. So to actually create the block, we're going to need a register method that will allow us to register that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go public static, and this method needs to be generic, so we can go t extends block, and this will then return t, and we're just going to call this method register. We're going to pass in a string name, and then we're also going to pass in t, which is the actual block itself. Then all we're going to do inside of this method is we're going to return, and we're going to return registry, and that is the one from net.minecraft.registry.register. The registry we are going to use is going to be registries.block. Then we need to pass in the ID. So if you recall from the previous tutorial, we created a method in our main class to do this. So that will be tutorialmod.id, and then we're going to pass in the name. And then finally it needs the block, so we can pass in the block. Okay, and what we can then do is just do register, and we can give it a name, so example underscore block, and then we can also provide it with a block. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to do a new block. Now this needs to take in an abstract block dot settings, so we're going to do abstract block dot settings dot create, and you can also copy. So if you wanted to copy from a vanilla block, you wanted to copy the settings, then you can do that. So for example, the hardness, the sounds, those kind of things, not functionality, just the actual like properties of that block, like light level as well. Then you can do that. So you could just do blocks dot, and you could choose a block to copy from, so blocks.stone, for example. Okay, and if you do your brackets correctly, of course, then there you go. That would be a block registered with the same properties of stone. And if you recall, if you you can either middle click this field or you can control click it, and if you do that, it should bring you to the declaration. So you can see stone is there, but you can see stone is set here. And you can see the different properties that it has. So you see that it has a map color of stone gray. You see it has an instrument of bass drum. It requires a tool, and then this is the strength, which is the hardness and the resistance. But we'll get into those in a second. So what we're going to actually do here is we're going to create our own properties. So we're going to do .create, and then we can supply any of the different properties that we want to use. So I'm actually going to move this back up a line, and I'm going to move this down a line, and then we're going to do each different property on a new line. That's just the way I like to format this. In fact, we can even put this up there and then put our properties on this second line down here. So we can do any properties that we want. So you can go through these and see which ones you want. There's only a few that we're going to actually need here. So the ones we're going to be using is the strength property, and this will take in a hardness as the first one and then a resistance as the second one. So hardness would be how long basically it takes to break with a tool, and the resistance is the explosive resistance of that block. So we can do both of these. I'm going to do something like 1.5 for the hardness, and then I'm going to do something around 6 for the resistance. So 1.5 is roughly the same as stone, and then 6 is I believe about half the explosive resistance of stone. Once again, you can obviously go into that blocks class and check if you want to do that. The next property that we are going to add, or the one that I'm going to add, is going to be requires tool. Now this block is basically going to function as a stone type block. This is effectively, think of this as like a diamond block, and think of our item here as a diamond, and then in a future tutorial we'll make a recipe that crafts this into our block. That's basically what I'm aiming for here. So I want this to only be mineable with a pickaxe of a certain level. So what we're going to do is we're going to add requires tool. And that means that to be able to get the drops for this block, you have to have the correct tool. And then you can add any other properties that you want. So I don't need to add any of these other properties, but if you want to add any of these, feel free. For example, you can set the instrument. You can set it to be a liquid. You can add luminance. So that's basically like a light level. You can set the map color. You can set whether or not it should have collision, whether or not it's opaque. You have things like piston behavior, post-processing. You have whether or not it's replaceable. You can set the resistance directly here. You can set the slipperiness, so whether it should be like ice, for example. The sound group that it's in for like braking, placing, those kind of things. Whether or not it should suffocate you, whether or not it randomly ticks, and velocity. All those kind of things. I'm not going to do any of those. I'm just going to keep it with these two. And then I'm going to close that off like that. Now this will go ahead and actually register a block. However, it will not register an item. So we have two options here. We can either come into our item init and go ahead and register an item manually for each block item. So I will just quickly show you how to do that since it is fairly simple. So we'll just go with a public static final. Now this is going to be a block item instead of an item, since that's how block items work. They have their own class that extends the item class. And I'm just going to call this example block item. If I could type, of course, that would be lovely. And that is just going to be equal to register. And we're going to call this example block. And you see this is actually somewhere where I've gone a little bit different from the convention, because the convention obviously is that this name and this name should be the same. In this case, I've decided to call it example block item. You could just call it example block if you wanted. That wouldn't be too big of a deal. In fact, I will do that just to keep consistency. But sometimes I do like to do underscore item to note that this is a block item. It doesn't really matter though. And then we can just pass in the actual block item instance. So we're going to do a new block item. Now this is first going to take in our actual block. So we can do block init dot example block. And then what we can do is we can give it the properties. So that would just be a new item.settings. And you can obviously add any special settings here if you wanted. For example, like fireproof maybe. And boom, that would be fine. However, I'm not actually going to do it this way. So I'm going to remove that. And we're going to create a method that will basically allow us to register a block item for us. So I'm going to come into here again. And I'm going to create another method. So I'm going to go public static. This is once again going to be generic, so t extends block, and I'm going to call this method register with item, and then I'm going to give it a string name that needs to return t. There you go. It's also going to need the block, and then it's going to need an item.settings, which will be the settings. There you go, and you just need to make sure you import item, of course, from net.minecraft.item. And what we're going to do in here is we're going to say t, which is the registered block, is going to be we're going to call that registered, and that is going to just be equal to our register, which is going to take in the name and the block. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do item init. So that's our item init class, and we're going to call register. And then we're going to register by the name, and we're just going to do a new block item. And that as we said earlier, takes in the block as the first parameter, so we can give it the registered, and then we can give it the settings that we're passing in as a parameter, and then we can just return our registered block like that. And then I'm also going to create another method which is going to be pretty much the same except without this item.settings property, so like that. And effectively what this will do is just return our register with item. It's going to take in the name, the block, and then it's just going to take in a new item.settings. So that will just use the default settings if we ever want to just do default settings, which you'll see that we can now change this here to register with item. And if we wanted to, we could pass in our special settings here that maybe says that it's fireproof. However, if we just wanted to have, for example, that, then we wouldn't need to do this. We could just remove this parameter entirely since we have our overload here that does that for us. So I'm just going to keep it like that. And then what we need to do is exactly the same with the item in it. We need to create a load method. There we go. And inside of our main class, we can just call that load method. So we're going to go block init.load, and boom, that should load as a block. So we should now have a block in the game. However, we're not done, since we need to specify the models and the loot tables and all those kind of things. So first of all, we're going to come into our resources here. We're going to go into our assets and we're going to create a new directory, which is going to be called block states. So how blocks work is each block has multiple different states that it can be in. So by default, every block will just have a default state, and this is just a blank state. So it doesn't have any properties that are set to any values. It's just blank. So that is the default state of a block. The default state can be changed if you do have multiple states though, so do note that. And then you have other states that you can have. Think, for example, a furnace. A furnace has lots of different states. So a furnace will have a lit state, and it will have, and that's a Boolean. So that could either be set to true or that could be set to false. You then also have a rotation state for the furnace, which whether or not it's facing north, south, east, or west. And then you could have lit north, you could have unlit north, you could have lit south, unlit south, and you get the point. So you have multiple combinations of states. Now, our block doesn't have any special states, so our block state is going to be relatively simple, but just note that basically per state you can change the model, and you'll kind of see that here, even though we are just going to have a default state. So we're going to create a new file in here, and this needs to be exactly the same as what you named your block. So ours is just example_block, and then that is a .json file. So inside of here, we're just going to create a empty object. And then inside of here, we're going to create the variants. So these are going to be the different states that we could have, the different variations of states. Now ours is just a default state, so this is going to be a blank string, and that is going to be equal to an object. And inside of this object, we are going to specify the model, and the model for this particular state will be our mod ID. So that is tutorial mod colon, then it is a block. So we're going to do block slash and then the name of our block. So example_block. And if we had multiple states, so let's say, for example, this was a furnace, we could have something like lit equals true, and we could have facing equals north, and or we'll say east, just to show you something else that we could do with this. And then we could say that the model for this would be tutorial mod colon block, and then this could be a lit example block. And then we could say that the Y rotation could be 90, right? And that's kind of what you can do with this. So you can say that for each variance, there could be a different model with a different Y rotation is the kind of thing that you could do. Obviously, we can't do this because we haven't created any properties for our blocks. We will be doing that in a very soon tutorial, but for now just note that this is kind of the kind of thing that you can do inside of a block state. And then we need to create this actual model file. So we're going to come into assets tutorial mod, and then we're going to create a new directory which will be the models, and you see that I already have a directory of models. So then we'll do slash and then we're going to do block. So that will create a block directory inside of our models directory. And then inside of here, we're going to create a new file. This needs to be exactly the same name as what you put in here. So ours is example_block.json. Now this is going to be a model file. So what we're going to do is we're going to first say what the parent of this model is. So that's the kind of transformations that it will use. The parent for us is going to be Minecraft block/cube_all, and that just defines that this model will have all of its sides be, so it will be a cubed model and all of its sides will use the same texture. It's basically what we're saying here. Then we're going to say what the textures are. So we'll say textures, and inside of here we can say that all, so that's kind of like an identifier that the cube all model actually uses. So all will be set to tutorial mod block / and then whatever our texture is called. Now I'm just going to keep mine to be exactly the same, so example_block. But you can imagine how you would do this for your different states if you were to have a stated block. And there are different models that you can parent off of. So for example, there is cube, I believe, orientable, I believe. And in that circumstance, I think you have side as a thing, and then I think you also have I think there's also end or something like that. I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head what those are, but you can just check vanilla if you ever want to. So if you do your searching and you search in your files in all places, you can just search for, let's say for example, oak_log.json. And if we look for one that is going to be inside of the models, you can see there's some very long paths in here. But if we look for the actual model, so there you go, you can see that this is cube column. There you go, it's column, not orientatable. And then you have the end texture and you have the side texture. So you can just look through vanilla if you ever want to know. Now, once we have done our block model, we can go ahead and move on to create the item model, since we still need to specify how the item should look. So we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this example_block. So once again, that needs to be the exact same name as your block, so what you registered it as. And all we're going to do in here is specify the parent. So this is just going to be any normal old item model. And we're going to say that this parent's off tutorial mod block / example_block. So basically what this does is it says that the parent will be inside of our mod ID, which is tutorial mod right here. So it'll be an assets tutorial mod. Then it knows that it's going to be in the block directory, but it knows that block will always be inside of models. So it's looking in models and then block, and then it's looking for the example block model, which is this one that we created here. I forgot to change this back to cube all. That could have been a bit devastating. There you go. And effectively what that will do is that will just use the normal transformations that a block would have. However, do note that you can obviously just use an item texture. So think, for example, redstone dust, it uses an item texture, but it is actually a block. So that would just mean you do exactly the same as your example item. So you do something like this, and you could have example block, and that would effectively get you the same result as, say, a torch or redstone dust or those kind of things, or like a lantern, where they have an actual just normal 2D item texture. That's effectively how you would achieve that. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to create this a normal block, so it will just use the normal model for that. And that should be all of the model things. We do also need to just make sure we add to the lang file. So let's come in here, and this will be block.tutorialmod, and then the name of our block. So example_block, and we'll call this example block. There you go. So that is all of the assets that we need to do. However, we also want to create a loot table, and we also want to specify what tool it should use, and also what level of tool. So how do we do that? So what we need to do is come into our resources, and we're going to create a new directory, and this will be the data directory. So if you remember from one of the first tutorials, we talked about how the assets directory is effectively your resource pack. Well, the data directory will be like a data pack, and these come bundled inside of your mod. So you don't have to worry about users installing these, they're just bundled straight in there. So we have the data directory, and then inside of here, we're going to create a new directory. So we'll do the loot tables first. So we'll do tutorial mod. So this will be our data pack, tutorial mod. And then inside of there, we're going to create a new directory. And this will be for loot underscore table. And then we're going to create another new directory inside of there, which will be for the blocks. So that is the block loot tables. Now, to create a loot table, we can either write the JSON out manually, which would probably be a little bit painful, or we can use DataGen, which we will be doing in a future tutorial. But for now, we are going to use a wonderful website, which is misode.github.io, this website right here, and they have a loot table JSON generator that we can use. So make sure you set your version to 1.21, of course, because things are very different between versions. So we're on 1.21. Now, instead of kind of manually creating a loot table, which you can see you can obviously add entries, you can, do whatever you want. If you want to add functions, you can add conditions, you can mess around with these kind of things. I'm just going to use a preset to keep it nice and simple. So I'm going to look at, for example, acacia planks, right? And then all I'm going to do is change Minecraft::acacia planks to tutorial mod :example_block. And then also where we have a random sequence down here, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to do tutorial mod blocks example_block. And that's just a random sequence that it uses. So I'm going to just copy that down here using the copy icon. And you will also see how it generates here. So this is like, for example, if it were in a chest. Obviously, it's not in a chest, but just imagine that the drops went straight into a chest. This is how it would look. So you can generate a new seed here. And you see, obviously, this is just going to generate the same item. And there isn't like a texture or anything because it doesn't know what it looks like. But you can regenerate it and just see how that would look. So we can just go ahead and paste that into here, and that will be our loot table. So that's nice and simple. We will come back to this when we do DataGen, and maybe I'll try and explain this a little bit better. But yeah, you can just create those JSON yourself for now, and that will be fine. Then what we need to do is specify the tool that we want to use to be able to break it. So we're going to come back into our resources directory. We're going to create a new directory. Now this will be inside of data again. So we need to do data / and this time it's going to be inside of the Minecraft data pack. So we're actually going to alter the Minecraft data pack. And then inside of there, we're going to create a new directory. And this will be for the tags. So we're going to create a new directory, tags. And then inside of there, we're going to create another new directory, which will be for block. Now inside of here, we can create a new file. And this will basically say, in fact, yeah, we'll do this first, even though it makes less sense to do it first. But you'll see why we're going to do it first in a second. It just saves us a little bit of time. So this is going to be the level of tool that we want. So for example, you maybe want iron, maybe you want stone, maybe you want diamond. You would do needs _. So I want to use an iron tool or above. So I'm going to say iron _tool. And then I'm going to say .json. Like that. And then what we're going to put inside of here is going to be just a normal JSON file. We're first going to say that replace is false because we don't want to overwrite the vanilla one. And then we're going to say that the values, now this is a string array, and I'm just going to add basically, so by not replacing, these values will just add it. If you were to replace, these values would literally overwrite it. So you almost always want to use replace false. And we're just going to say tutorial mod :example_block. So whatever we called our block basically. And that is it. That's all we need for this JSON file. Then if we come into our Minecraft tags block directory again, we can create another directory inside of here, which will be called mineable. And then inside of here, we can create a file, which will be for the tool that we want to use. So the tool I want to use is a pickaxe. So all I'm going to do is type pickaxe.json. If you wanted an axe, then it would be axe.json. If I could type, of course. And yeah, you get the point. So fairly simple. We're just going to do a pickaxe, and this JSON file is actually going to be exactly the same as this one. So it's just replace false, and then the values are whatever blocks you want to apply to this. Okay, and then we can close both of those. And that should be it, unless I've forgotten something, of course, which I don't think I have. So let's go ahead and run the game, and we should be able to see that our block will be in there. Now, if we do /give @s tutorial mod example block, and oh, it looks like we have a missing texture. So this is actually an opportunity for us to figure out what the problem is. So what we can do, of course, is go through all our files and see if we can figure out the problem like that. Just check the spellings of everything. However, there is an easier way of fixing these problems. So if we come into IntelliJ, you'll see we have down here our run window. And you can, if you don't have that for some reason, you can just go view tool windows and run, and that will open up. Now, if you scroll in here, you'll see that this is the output. You see that we have the error here. So we have missing textures in model, tutorial mod, example block. Nice and simple, right? It can't find our tutorial mod block, example block texture. And that is because I forgot to add it inside of here. So obviously you need to make sure you do that. So I'm going to create a new directory, which will be textures/block. And then I'm just going to grab the texture that I want to use. And this will be exactly the correct name, so example block. And if I now go back into the game, actually we can first build the project up here. So in your tool window, build project, and that'll just take a second to build that. And then once that's built, we can actually just go ahead and reload the assets. So we can go F3 and T. Now if we do /give @s tutorial mod example block, you'll now see that we do have our texture in there. So that's just how you can debug that. Always check the logs first. They're very important. If you want to see the actual log files at any point, by the way, to view that, you come into your run folder, and inside of here you have logs. You have the latest.log, which is just basically what you're going to see in your console down here. And then you also have the debug.log, which has a bunch of extra useful information about, everything that's going on, basically. Now, the latest log is usually fine, but sometimes the debug log is necessary. So if someone ever asks you for your logs, just send the debug log. It's easier for everyone. But the latest is probably fine too. It's up to you. And these GZ files are just, I think you can actually just rename them and remove the GZ. So I think if you do that, no, you can't, because they're in some like weird format. I think there is a way to access them. I don't remember how, to be honest. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about these. These are just old logs anyways. So that is our block. We can place it down, and you see it functions as a block pretty much. We can try and break it. So let's do that. Let's grab a pickaxe. We're going to grab a stone pickaxe and then an iron pickaxe, and those will be fine. So then we'll go game mode survival. So first of all, we're going to try break it with our hand. So you see it's obviously going to take a while. And we'll just test that this doesn't drop anything, because it shouldn't drop anything. Correct. And then we'll try break it with a stone pickaxe. You see that doesn't break anything. And then we can break it with an iron pickaxe, and you'll see it does break it, because we set the tool level to iron and we set the tool type to pickaxe. So we can't break it with our hand because the tool type is pickaxe, and we can't break it with a stone pickaxe because the level is iron. So you see that has worked perfectly fine. So that is actually it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, I think we're going to do creative tabs, and then after that we'll move on to data gen, or maybe recipes first. I think we'll do data gen first, so then we can do recipes in data gen completely, and that will just save us a little bit of time. So yeah, I will see you then. Goodbye.